Alright guys, so Mehdi Hasan, who has been fully unleashed ever since leaving MSNBC to start his own independent network called Zeteo, recently made an appearance over on CNN to debate the ICC, the International Criminal Court, recently issuing an application for arrest warrants for top Israeli and Hamas officials. And the guy that he is debating on this is this guy Jonathan Shanzer, who, believe it or not, ironically works for the Foundation of the Defense of Democracies. And he's taking the pro-Israel side on this. So I think that speaks for itself. Let's go ahead and jump into this debate and try to work our way through it.
Mehdi, I want to start with you. And I know that we will spend a lot of time discussing the part that has gotten this really to the front pages, which is the charges against the Israeli leaders. But on the issue of Hamas, is it justified for there to be such a delay in bringing charges against Hamas for actions that happened many, many months ago on October 7th that we've known about? Those atrocities have been clear for a long time, and yet the charges only come now.
I'm not sure, actually. I think that Karim Khan, the ICC chief prosecutor, would say that he was building a very careful case. He's a very careful lawyer. He has been there for, I think, a few years, since 2021. And when he became chief prosecutor, he said he would be looking at Israel-Palestine because the ICC said they had jurisdiction over crimes committed on Palestinian territory. He's interviewed survivors. He talks about it very eloquently in his statement today. And I think, look, Hamas should be held to account for what we all saw them do on October the 7th, the killing of civilians, hostage taking. Some of us said on the day, those are war crimes. So I'm glad they're being held to account. The problem, of course, is that some people, including the President of the United States, say only Hamas should be held to account for crimes committed in that part of the world, even though since October the 7th, tragically, we have seen many more innocent people killed on the other end, killed by the Israeli war machine. And I think it's quite right that, as you said in your introduction, no one is above the law. And this whole nonsense about moral equivalence, I've been hearing it all day. Moral equivalence. No one's saying there's any moral equivalence. People are saying that there is one law, international humanitarian law. Everyone should be held to it. Whether you are a government, whether you are a militant group, whether you are a terrorist, whether you're an individual, whether you're a prime minister, no one is above the law. And Karim Khan is doing the right thing in bringing charges against people in that part of the world, requesting arrest warrants for people who we've all seen Netanyahu and the leaders of Hamas carry out horrific things in front of our eyes.
Jonathan, your response?
Okay, so we'll continue with his response here in a second, but just to touch on the question that was asked by this CNN reporter, it's kind of a weird way to begin this conversation, saying that why did it take so long for the ICC to bring charges against Hamas leaders for some of the war crimes that they committed on October 7th? It's a weird question because you know what else is missing from the ICC's issuing of this application for arrest warrants? If you actually go and you look at the charges that they are trying to bring against Benjamin Netanyahu and Gallant, what's missing is that they don't actually address the illegal occupation of the West Bank. They are not going after Israeli leaders or settlers for violence and terrorism directed at Palestinians as they continue to expand their illegal settlements and fracture Palestinians into a million different enclaves. Those settlements in and of themselves are war crimes under international law. So if you're going to ask why did it take so long for them to bring charges against Hamas like 7 months later, why are we then not asking the question, why are there not charges being brought against Israel for these brazen war crimes that are these settlements in the West Bank that have been going on for years and years and years and years at this point? So it's kind of a weird question to start off the debate, but they're going to get more into the moral equivalence narrative that we have been seeing here. So let's hear from Jonathan.
Look, I'm not going to get into this moral equivalence thing because I think it's a ridiculous thing to talk about. We know that Hamas deliberately went out and raped women, slaughtered 1,200 people, took 240 people hostage, and the Israelis are now responding in a defensive war, and they have every right to do it, and they're putting their own soldiers at risk while they're trying to deliver aid, and that's the charge that the...
Okay, I'm sorry, but he just went for 10-15 seconds and already there's 4 different lies that need to be addressed there, right? Number one, it's very weird to me that you would say that Israel is engaging in a purely defensive war, even though upwards of 90% of the people they have been killing have been innocent children. A majority that they have been killing have been just women and children, and you're going to make the claim that that's defensive. But Hamas's attack on October 7th, where again, they did commit war crimes, but they actually killed a lower percentage of civilians on October 7th than Israel has since October 7th, okay? Part of that 1,200 number that he just cited that were killed on October 7th by Hamas, many of those, hundreds of those, were IDF soldiers that they attacked because they attacked military installations as well. Now again, that's not to say that, that the October 7th was entirely justified or anything like that, or that killing civilians is okay, but it's just to put things in perspective here. It's just a bizarre argument to say that what Hamas did on October 7th was clearly a brazen war crime, and they're the genocidal monsters. But then what's happened since October 7th, which is magnitudes worse and magnitudes more deadly for civilians, that is purely defensive. Not to mention the fact that you guys have been doing a total blockade on the Gaza Strip for, 16, 17 years at this point? You've been occupying the Palestinians for decades and decades at this point. It's a very strange argument to try to go with. Now, in terms of the moral equivalence argument, I want to show you guys something real quick, because this is not something we've just been hearing from guys like Jonathan, Shanzer or whatever. This is something that has been repeated by every single pro-Israel politician in the United States. So here's like a compilation of some of the ones that we have been seeing. So we have Grace Meng, we have Bob Casey, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Tom Cotton, Adam Schiff, John Fetterman, the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I mean, everybody across the political spectrum in the United States has been bringing up there is no moral equivalence between Hamas and between Israel. Okay, two things on that real quick. Number one, that's not what the ICC said. The ICC, nowhere in their report, nowhere in their application for arrest warrants, did they say Hamas and Israel are equally evil or something like that. Or did they say Hamas and Israel committed equal crimes? Nobody was saying that. So number one, it's a complete deflection. It's a distraction, because nobody's making that claim. The standards for whether or not arrest warrants should be issued by the ICC is whether or not that party or that state or that person has violated international law. It has nothing to do with a comparison between Hamas and Israel. But, and here's my second point on that, if you want to do that comparison in terms of the worst atrocities Hamas was responsible for committing versus the worst atrocities that Israel has been responsible for committing, it's not going to look too good for Israel. In fact, I'll confidently say the atrocities that Israel has committed over the last 7 months outpaces anything Hamas has ever done by light speed. I mean, it's not even in the same realm of conversation, right? I mean, we've talked about the complete and utter devastation of the hospital system, the education system, again, the disproportionate attacks against civilians. We're talking about a majority of residential buildings that have been destroyed. They bombed mosques and churches, etc. This is not a defensive war. And if you want to do that comparison here, on the one side we have, an attack by Hamas on October 7th, where yes, part of that was they did commit war crimes, and we're comparing that to Israel since then, that's in the midst of committing a genocide. So I don't know that comparison is even something you want to get into, but he continues here.
ICC brought against Israel that they were waging a siege when in fact they're actually putting their own soldiers at risk. But
well,
I think
Jonathan,
it's
can I ask you about that for a second there?
Here.
Let me ask you about that, because I think that is, as you point out, a key part of what the ICC is saying. They're talking about the use of starvation and deprivation as tools of war. And you may remember that senior Israeli officials at the onset of this war, they stated pretty clearly no power, no water would be going to Gaza until the hostages were freed. That was pointed out at the time to be a statement of collective punishment. There is as most international observers say, a famine on the verge of descending on Gaza right now.
It's not on the verge, and that's not what the experts are saying. They're saying that northern Gaza especially is in full-blown famine at this point. We just heard from Cindy McCain a couple of days ago saying that children are dying the size of skeletons. Okay, so this famine is underway. And it's a verifiable fact that Israel has been blocking the aid from getting in. In fact, right now, there's less aid getting in after the famine has already begun, in the last couple of weeks since Israel began their invasion of Rafah. So the idea that Israel is like, oh, we're putting our precious IDF soldiers on the line to risk getting all of this aid to Palestinians, and I don't know, they're just being too greedy or something like that, it's ludicrous.
Shouldn't that be something that is under the scrutiny of the ICC?
Well, let me just say, on the verge is not a famine, right? And I think we need to differentiate here. And everybody keeps saying on the verge, but we've not yet seen facts that back this up. There is no UN.
That's a complete lie. He's just fucking lying. Every single major human rights organization, UN representatives, everybody is saying that if it's not on the verge of a famine, it is already in the midst of a famine. So he's just fucking lying here.
Criteria for how many calories need to come in every day for this not to be a siege. The Israelis are actually bringing in massive numbers of trucks, and they're doing it at peril to their own soldiers. warrants. And moreover, I think we just need to say this. I have not ever seen a successful case brought by any international court in any circumstance where you've seen this siege thing actually play out. I think it's a Hail Mary. There doesn't seem to be, not only have we not seen any cases brought, but I don't think we've ever seen a successful case brought on this. We know that this ICC prosecutor was actually negotiating with the Israelis and with the United States up until a few days ago. This is a monkey court if they're negotiating about what kind of charges they're going to bring. And then they finally bring them, and it just does not hold water. And we can see now the reaction of the President of the United States, the reaction of members of Congress. They're going to sanction this prosecutor, just like they did the last one, because the ICC is simply illegitimate. It is not taken seriously here in the United States because they pick and choose how they want to apply this very loose interpretation of international law.
Mehdi, I want you to respond, but
I mean, again, guys, it is not up in the air whether or not Israel is withholding aid from getting into Gaza. Why the fuck else did the United States just spend months and hundreds of millions of dollars to build a port that ended up failing in a couple of days, by the way, off of the coast of Gaza? Why did we do that, right? If you're not blocking the aid from getting in through the normal ports. I mean, that is not up in the air. It is a verifiable fact. And for him to say, we've never seen the ICC successfully bring a case against a country that's committing a siege of a civilian population, we really haven't seen anything like this done before in modern history. I can't think of any other example where there has been this significant of a total siege on such a densely populated civilian population. I've never seen anything like this in at least my entire life. So it's unprecedented in terms of the crimes committed by Israel, and therefore, yeah, of course it's going to be an unprecedented case that is being brought by the ICC. But Mehdi's going to respond here.
I'm going to correct myself. The United States has already said, Samantha Power, a U.S. official, has said that famine has begun in Gaza. Mehdi, your response to what Jonathan said?
So just on the ICC, America's not a party to the ICC, so the rest of the world doesn't really care whether America likes the ICC or not. That's not really relevant here. The jurisdiction is the ICC's. As for Karim Khan, he was actually Israel's favorite choice for prosecutor in 2021, as the Israeli media reported at the time. Now suddenly he's unpopular. He's the greatest anti-Semite of our times, according to Netanyahu, simply because he's asked for arrest warrants. Jonathan says we're on the verge of famine. As you said, Abby, Samantha Power disagrees. In fact, you know who disagrees with Jonathan? Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Program, the wife of the most pro-Israel American senator of my lifetime, John McCain, says northern Gaza is in a full-blown famine. She said the other day that children in Gaza are dying as skeletons, right? That is what is going on in Gaza. She also says Israel is not allowing the World Food Program full access. Jonathan wants you to believe that this is a defensive war. He wants you to disbelieve every major human rights group in the world that says otherwise. He wants you to believe there's no famine in Gaza and disbelieve every major humanitarian aid agency on the planet that disagrees with him. The facts are pretty clear to people who are watching. There's a reason why a majority of Canadians want to see an ICC investigation. There's a reason why a majority of Britons say Israel is committing war crimes. There's a reason why a majority of French, Belgians, Germans, Swedes have all told pollsters they think Israeli officials should be prosecuted for war crimes. There's a reason why plurality of Americans, according to a recent poll that my organization Zeteo did, say Israel is guilty of war crimes. Because we all have eyes. We can see children being pulled from the rubble. We can see churches, mosques, refugee camps, hospitals, schools, libraries, universities, cemeteries being bombed. And as for Joe Biden himself accused Israel of indiscriminate bombing. Abby, his words, indiscriminate bombing. That is the literal definition of a war crime.
Jonathan?
And, you know, Mehdi is obviously 100% correct about that. And it is very interesting that Jonathan would try to make the claim that it's actually the ICC, it's the International Criminal Court, that is delegitimizing itself because it has like a selective process of picking and choosing who they go after and when they decide to implement international law and legal standards, right? That is incredible. That is an incredible statement that he just put out there, because it's actually the exact opposite of reality. Because not only did the ICC bring charges, not only against Israeli officials, but also Hamas officials, right? Which kind of scrambles that narrative that they're being like biased and anti-Semitic towards Israel. But then on top of that, who's really applying the double standard here? Who's really the hypocrite when it comes to applying two different sets of standards for international law? I covered the stories of Joe Biden back when the ICC was issuing arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin for war crimes committed in Ukraine. And Joe Biden praised the ICC at that time and said that the arrest warrants were justified. But now when it comes to our ally in Israel, they get a complete blank check. And any sort of scrutiny on them from an international legal organization like the ICC, that's somehow like a totally unfair attack. It's like a monkey court or a kangaroo court or something like that. We know where the double standard is. It's with the Joe Biden administration. It's with the United States of America. Okay, these international bodies like the ICC, like even the United Nations to some extent, like the ICJ, The United States of America and many Western European countries view these institutions as weapons that we can wield against poorer nations around the world or against our geopolitical adversaries, right? Karim Khan, the prosecutor who brought this application for arrest warrants, just the other day revealed that, and he didn't reveal the name, but many people think that it was actually Lindsey Graham. He said that a senior official in the United States actually directly said to him that the courts, the International Criminal Court, is supposed to be used against Africa and against thugs like Putin. That's what Karim Khan just said the other day. So again, we know exactly who's doing the double standards, who's being hypocritical in this situation, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, you want to talk about the evidence that's being collected right now? It's being collected by the UN. Now, dig down a little further, and you're going to realize that there's only one major agency that has been active inside Gaza, and that has been UNRWA. And we know that UNRWA has been a partner with Hamas in carrying out the war crimes that we're talking about that Hamas has committed. True. And by the way, no one's talking about the fact that Hamas has been diverting aid when it comes into Gaza. Why are we not talking about the siege that they're putting on their own people? And one more thing here I've got to just say is that if you look at what the charges are that the ICC has brought, they are not talking about shooting charges. They're not talking about kinetic strikes that they're calling war crimes on the part of the Israelis, because they know that Israel has actually conducted itself on the battlefield in ways that far exceed the United States or any other Western power in recent years on the battlefield. That ratio of civilian to combatant deaths is drastically lower. They know they can't bring those charges, so they've tried this Hail Mary, and it's just simply not
Jonathan,
going to stick.
Okay, again, a complete lie, and the ICC likely is going to be looking into more allegations of war crimes after this. This likely is not going to be the only series of charges that they attempt to bring against Israeli officials. So on that front, I guess, good luck, because that's probably coming down the pipeline. The idea that none of the Israeli strikes have been war crimes, none of them have been disproportionate or targeting civilians, is such a ludicrous lie that it's almost not worth addressing at this point. So they continue.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I want you to kind of address just the substance of the issue of, especially when it comes to food and water and basic human needs. The United States had to build a pier on the coast of Gaza to get aid in because it was so difficult to get the Israelis to allow basic aid in overland. Not just, aid trucks are coming in, that is true, but not as many as were coming in before the war. And, independent observers have said basic things are being blocked at the borders by Israel for all kinds of different reasons. All of that adds up to something that I think some people would say at least should be under scrutiny. Do you think Israel should even be subject to scrutiny for how it is carrying out this war?
Look, of course it should be under scrutiny, and every country that wages war will come under scrutiny in today's day and age. Now, look, I actually went to Cyprus a few weeks ago, and I went and talked to the people that were going to build this pier, and the people that were going to deliver aid to this pier, and the people that were going to vet it. And I can just tell you that the amount of time and effort that went into this. You've got Israeli customs agents sitting over there reviewing these packages because they were so uncomfortable with the way that it was coming in from Egypt or the things that were coming in directly to their ports, and they couldn't process them well enough. They took the criticism that the United States leveled, and they've taken action. And so now we have this incredible system where the United States has built a pier. We've got the Cypriot authorities, we've got the Emiratis, we've got the Israelis reviewing what comes through and approving it and then sending it on, and we're going to see a massive uptick.
So
but
it
by
sounds
the way,
like you're acknowledging that there's been a problem. It sounds like that's what you're acknowledging, that there was a problem.
Of course there was a problem.
Yeah.
This is a war zone. There are problems in every war zone.
Mehdi,
and there are always going to be challenges.
Can I
always.
Go ahead, Mehdi.
Can I just come in and respond to something Jonathan said a moment ago? He said the only evidence we have of war crimes that's being collected is by UN and by UNRWA, and they're all compromised. That's just not true. I myself have interviewed on my show multiple American doctors who are on the ground in Gaza who have testified to what is going on, what they're seeing with their own lying eyes. I have a friend who is a doctor who went out and served in the European hospital in Gaza. He saw children being brought into the hospital with gunshot wounds to the head, right? Those are crimes. Those have been witnessed by American citizens, British citizens, French citizens. They're all on the record. To pretend this is just about Hamas or UNRWA is nonsense, right? The evidence is there for anyone who's been to Gaza.
Mehdi is not an international lawyer, and nor are the doctors. It is not up to you to decide what a war crime is. And by the way, I'm not even sure that it's up to the ICC.
I agree. It's up to the chief prosecutor of the ICC, who is a lawyer, a very respected one. And can I finish my point? Just to go back to what Abby said at the start.
That's so good. After just spending this entire debate trying to delegitimize the ICC, now he turns around and he's trying to delegitimize Mehdi by trying to make the argument of, well, it's not up to you to determine that, it's up to international lawyers. What? The same international lawyers you were just saying are doing a monkey court against Israel? What the fuck?
You know, if they don't want to be charged with war crimes, maybe they shouldn't have done war crimes. Yoav Gallant is being charged with starvation. This is a man, the defense minister of Israel, who said on October the 9th, I'm ordering a total siege of Gaza. No fuel, no electricity, no food. It's closed. Well, maybe he shouldn't have said and done that. Maybe he wouldn't have an arrest warrant out or an application for an arrest warrant against him today if he hadn't done that.
All right, Mehdi and Jonathan.
Okay, so, I mean, a couple of things here just to finish off. Number one, what Mehdi just said about UNRWA is completely true. And it's, again, very deeply strange for Jonathan to try to make the case that, well, it's only allegations from this Hamas-connected UNRWA organization that are accusing Israel of war crimes. It's strange because, number one, that's not true. Every single major human rights organization around the world is making that same claim. Several different UN organizations are making that same claim. In fact, not only are you facing arrest warrants from the ICC, you're also facing an ongoing genocide case at the International Court of Justice. So there's plenty of evidence, including direct testimony from doctors on the ground, for example, from Palestinian journalists, from all over the place, from fucking IDF soldiers posting their own war crimes on social media. There is overwhelming evidence for war crimes being committed in Gaza. This is not controversial at this point. So very bizarre to try to make this only about UNRWA, right? Which also, by the way, there's no evidence whatsoever that was ever provided by Israel to say that there was a firm connection between UNRWA and October 7th. No evidence provided whatsoever. Of course, the United States still went along with their propaganda and, basically determined through U.S. legislation that we cannot fund UNRWA, so cutting aid to a population we are helping to starve at the moment. So that's just it's a lazy argument, right? Which really is the entire pro-Israel argument at this point. It's all just fucking lazy. It's all just, let's talk about October 7th. Let's talk about Hamas. Everything is the responsibility of Hamas. Israel has no agency in this situation whatsoever. And basically, believe the IDF and believe the Joe Biden administration, but don't believe anybody else on the face of the planet. That's basically the core of his argument there. Everybody is lying except for Israel. That's what he wants people to believe. And I also want to give a shout out to this anchor here. I've seen her in other segments. I don't know what her name is, but I've seen her in other segments where she's pretty terrible, but in this one she was actually good, right? She had actual, informed responses to some of the bullshit that was coming out of, Jonathan's mouth. And one of the most important things that I glossed over as we were watching that she brought up is the rhetoric that we have heard from Israeli politicians throughout the entirety of this. Because even if you want to pull it out of your ass and just lie that Israel is not blocking the aid, let's look at what they're saying, right? Because we had at the beginning of this, several top Israeli officials who have power in the Benjamin Netanyahu government, and they openly said, we're doing a complete siege. We're going to cut off the food, the fuel, the water, the electricity. Nothing gets in or out, right? And they at some points have allowed in a trickle of aid, but it's been nowhere remotely close to enough to actually hold up this population that they were bombing into oblivion. So, I mean, you just have to look at how Israelis talk about this, right? Between each other. What kind of rhetoric are they using? If they're using openly genocidal rhetoric, then maybe that gives you an insight in terms of what their actual goals are here, right? And that's something that has been incredibly frustrating watching the US media, is because most of the time they act as if Israeli media doesn't exist. They act as if these previous statements, in the aftermath of October 7th from Israeli politicians, that those statements don't exist. They openly said what they were going to do from the outset of this, and then they did it, right? It's not much more complicated than that. It shouldn't be a difficult puzzle to try to piece together, right? So again, credit to Mehdi, once again, doing a phenomenal job in these debates. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about, right? And there's not many people you could say that for. So just a couple of things here I'll touch on before I end off this video to back up the same kind of thing I was just saying about how the Israeli politicians are not exactly hiding what their intentions are. Here we have the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, saying that he is backing settlement and says that he is very happy to live in Gaza after the war. So he wants to resettle Gaza, and he wants to personally go and live there after they have ethnically cleansed or genocided, whatever word you want to use, the Palestinians in Gaza. So again, listen to what they are saying. Listen to them and believe them, not when they're speaking to American audiences and lying, but when they're openly stating their objectives to each other, right? This is the kind of shit they say publicly, in the open. I mean, we also have updates here from Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been making the rounds on American media, still refuses, by the way, to do sit-down interviews like this with Israeli media outlets, but he's perfectly willing to go and make the rounds on U.S. corporate outlets. And he basically, in this clip, like, threatened Karim Khan, the ICC's chief prosecutor. And, he said, I'm not really nervous about these arrest warrants, but Karim Khan should be nervous, right? And then he made sort of the same argument that Jonathan was making earlier by trying to say, well, it's actually the ICC that's delegitimizing themselves. In this interview later on, it's not in this clip, but he actually, without any irony in his voice, said that the ICC is making itself into a pariah. The ICC is making itself into a pariah. Not Israel, though, right? Even though a vast majority of the world at this point, as I talked about yesterday, recognizes a Palestinian state at this point, a vast majority of the world thinks that Israel's offensive in Gaza is, plausibly a genocide at this point. The global position on this is the complete opposite of Israel, right? It's the complete opposite of the United States' position on this. It's actually Israel and the United States and some Western European governments that are largely out of step with what global public opinion is on what's going on here, right? So again, incredible irony and projection coming from Bibi there. We also had an update from Germany, who apparently is joining in France and Norway, saying that if the ICC makes this final conclusion and issues these arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, that they will arrest them if they step foot in the country. I mean, guys, we're talking about Germany, France, and Norway. Germany, France, and Norway. These are like extensions of U.S. foreign policy for the most part. And they're saying if the ICC makes this conclusion, and Benjamin Netanyahu wants to come to Germany, France, or Norway, we're going to put the cuffs on him. I mean, that's gigantic, guys. I mean, again, this is closer to what public opinion says that we should be doing, not what Jonathan was trying to lay out there. We also had updated reports here from the United Nations Human Rights Special Procedures, and we have a report on torture that was just dropped about how Israel, as I covered in my video a couple weeks ago, I think at this point, of the detention camps inside of the Negev desert in Israel, where they have been rounding up a bunch of Palestinians, throwing them in completely horrific conditions, right, and torturing them in many circumstances, right? Physical abuse, beatings. Many of the prisoners have died. Many of them have been released back to Gaza and reported being sexually abused. There were circumstances that were reported that they kept them in positions with handcuffs on that were so egregious that people later had to have amputations due to those conditions. So, I mean, this is just some of the latest crimes, right? So, in other words, like, we're actually, the trajectory that we should be heading on is the ICC expanding the charges that they are bringing against Israel. There are dozens of top Israeli government officials and soldiers who should have charges brought against them, especially for shit like this. So, I mean, again, credit to Mehdi Hasan for putting that guy in his place. I think this conversation around the ICC arrest warrants is as cut and dry as you could possibly have. Again, if anything, they need to be more aggressive. They need to go after them for more crimes that have been committed. And I'll keep you guys updated as this continues on. Tomorrow we actually should have an update from the International Court of Justice on that genocide case that Israel is facing right now. And I've heard word, potentially maybe just rumors, that they may actually be coming out to issue an order for a ceasefire in Gaza. So that's also going to be potentially a massive update.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying